The email stared back at me, its words like a blade. Laura Bennett's methods are reckless and dangerous. I stood in my office, the hum of the air conditioner drowned out by the pounding in my chest, my hands shaking as I gripped the edge of my desk. I'm Laura Bennett, 42, a therapist with curly brown hair, green eyes that seem to see through people, and a calm demeanor that hides my fierce loyalty. That email, sent to every major colleague in Seattle's psychology circle, was a lie, claiming I'd mishandled a patient's case, and it came just before a conference where I was set to shine. I knew who was behind it. Dr. Richard Hale, my mentor, the man I'd trusted for years. He'd turned on me, his ego bruised by my growing success, my new therapy methods threatening his old-school throne. My practice was crumbling, clients canceling, and I felt like I was drowning in a city where reputation is everything. I closed my laptop, the Seattle skyline gray through the window, and thought of Tom and our life together. His steady hands a lifeline I needed now. My days were a blur of cancelled appointments and forced smiles, the office quiet except for the tick of the clock. I'd built my practice in this upper-middle-class Seattle neighborhood, where trust was sacred. But Richard's rumors had spread like wildfire. I'd spend mornings sipping coffee, staring at patient files, trying to salvage what was left, the smell of lavender from my diffuser a faint comfort. Richard, 60, was a silver-haired psychologist with a commanding presence, his charm masking a need to stay the top dog. I'd admired him, sat in his office as a grad student, soaking up his wisdom over coffee, believing he saw my potential. But when I pushed for innovative therapies, mindfulness, trauma-focused techniques, he saw a rival, not a protege. The conference was my chance to prove myself, but his lies turned colleagues against me, their whispers sharp as I walked past. I drove home that night, the Puget Sound a dark shimmer, and fell into Tom's arms, his architect's hands warm as he held me. The sound of his woodworking in the garage, steady and sure, reminded me I wasn't alone. The truth came through Elise, my best friend, a private investigator with a knack for tech. She met me at a Seattle cafe, the air thick with the smell of espresso and rain, and showed me screenshots from a private forum where Richard had posted anonymously, calling my work unethical. My stomach churned, my hands clenching the coffee mug, and I felt a mix of heartbreak and rage. I'd trusted him, shared my dreams, believed we were building something together, only to be betrayed. Elise's sharp eyes softened as she promised to dig deeper, her voice firm. I nodded, but inside I was reeling, scared of losing my practice, my purpose. Tom listened as I vented, his embrace grounding me, and I thought of a summer when I was 10, my mom kneading dough in our kitchen, her hands steady as she told me to stand tall. I'd been discarded, but I wasn't done. The turning point came when Elise slipped me a USB drive, her face grim as we sat in my office, the Seattle rain tapping the window. It held an audio file. Richard, his voice smug, admitting to a colleague that he'd exaggerated my mistakes to keep her in check. It wasn't enough to clear me, but it was a spark, a reason to fight. I sat at my desk that night, the room lit by a single lamp, patient files scattered around Tom's blueprints, and vowed to take Richard down. I remembered my mom, her voice soft as she told me to fight for what's right, her hands warm as she braided my hair. I'd been betrayed, but I could rebuild, for my clients, for Tom, for the therapist I'd worked to become. I started digging, spending nights reviewing case notes, my eyes burning from the laptop's glow. Tom would bring me tea, his quiet concern breaking my heart, and I'd force a smile, hating how my fight was pulling him in. Elise was relentless, pulling digital trails, emails, forum posts, timestamps that tied Richard to the rumors. I met a former colleague, Sarah, at a quiet bookstore, the air heavy with the smell of paper and ink, and she admitted she'd heard Richard's lies but stayed silent, scared of his influence. Her story, scribbled in my notebook, gave me hope. I kept everything in that notebook, hidden in my desk drawer next to a photo of Tom and me at a Seattle pier, our smiles bright from a happier day. The Pacific Northwest progressive culture, where trust was gold, made Richard's betrayal sting deeper, but it also fueled me, a memory of my mom's voice, her eyes fierce as she told me to hold my ground. The fight was slow, like untangling a knot, each thread deliberate but exhausting. I hired a lawyer dipping into savings meant for a family vacation, and gathered testimonials from clients who'd benefited from my work. Elise found more posts, fragments of Richard's campaign, and I tracked down a retired professor who'd seen Richard undermine others before me, his story shared over coffee in his cluttered apartment. Most colleagues stayed quiet, wary of Seattle's academic politics, but the professor's account, jotted in my notebook, gave me strength. The ethics board hearing was my battleground, a small room in a Seattle office building, the air thick with dust and tension. I wasn't there when Elise and the lawyer presented the audio, backed by her digital trail, but Elise called me after, her voice steady as she said the board had censured Richard, stripping his credibility. My practice was safe, clients trickling back, and I stood in my office, the Seattle skyline glowing, feeling a hollow victory, like finishing a session only to feel the weight of what's lost. Then came the letter, a week later slipped under my office door. Richard wasn't alone in this. I was alone, the office quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioner, and my heart raced, the paper heavy in my hand. It was anonymous, the handwriting neat but unfamiliar, and it felt like a warning, a hint that someone else had fueled Richard's lies. I tucked it in the notebook, my hands steady despite the fear, and sat by the window, the Seattle night closing in. I'd fought for my practice, for my family, but now I was scared, not just for me, but for Tom, for the life we'd barely held together. The anonymous letter, Richard wasn't alone in this, felt like a shadow trailing me, its words sharp and heavy. I sat by my office window, the Seattle night pressing against the glass, my hands still clutching the paper, my heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. I'm Laura Bennett, 42, a therapist with curly brown hair, green eyes that see through people, and a calm exterior that hides my fierce loyalty. I'd fought off Dr. Richard Hale, my mentor, who'd sabotaged my career with lies about my work. But that letter told me the fight wasn't over. Someone else was out there, pulling strings, and the thought of them targeting Tom or my practice made my chest tighten. I tucked the letter into my notebook, its pages thick with notes, forum posts, timestamps, the audio that took Richard down, next to a photo of Tom and me at a Seattle pier, our smiles a reminder of why I kept going. I locked the office door, the click loud in the silence, and drove home, the city lights blurred by rain, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. My days were a careful balance, the hum of my office a comfort, but every phone call felt like a potential threat. I'd sit with clients, guiding them through their fears, the smell of lavender from my diffuser steadying me, but my own fears crept in, making me jump at sudden noises. I'd check my email obsessively, scan the parking lot for unfamiliar cars, my heart skipping when a client lingered too long. I kept the letter from Tom, not wanting to worry him, but it changed me, made me quieter, more watchful, Tom noticed, his architect's eyes catching the tension in my shoulders as we cooked dinner, the kitchen warm with the smell of garlic and herbs. He'd rest his hand on mine, his touch grounding me, and ask if I was okay, his voice soft but probing. I'd nod, forcing a smile, but inside, I was unraveling, scared of what I didn't know. I thought about a summer when I was 12, my mom teaching me to garden, her hands steady in the soil as she told me to be strong. That strength felt far away now, but I clung to it. For Tom, for the life we'd built. Elise was my lifeline, her private investigator's mind sharper than ever. I met her at a Seattle park, the air crisp with the smell of pine and damp leaves, and showed her the letter, my voice low. She frowned, her fingers tracing the handwriting, and said it sounded like someone tied to Richard's network, maybe a colleague or a rival who'd backed his lies. She offered to dig into Richard's old contacts, looking for names that might connect, but warned me to be careful, her eyes serious. I nodded, grateful, but felt a chill, the kind that lingers even in a warm coat. Driving home, the Puget Sound a dark shimmer, I kept thinking about a winter when I was 16, my mom baking cookies, her voice soft as she told me to trust my gut. I was trying, but my gut was a knot, and the enemy was a ghost. I started building defenses, small but deliberate, like setting boundaries in a therapy session. I installed a security camera outside my office, its red light blinking in the dark, and added a password to my client files. I told Tom to call me if he saw anything odd at home, his gentle nod hiding a flicker of concern. Elise sensed the shift, bringing me coffee during our meetings, her way of checking on me without pushing. She'd sit with me in my office, the Seattle rain tapping the window, and I'd feel a flicker of my mom's voice, her hands warm as she told me to protect what mattered. I kept the notebook in my desk drawer, its pages now thick with notes, strange emails, unfamiliar cars, the letter. Next to that photo of Tom and me, its edges worn from my touch. Elise's call came a week later, on a foggy evening as I helped Tom with a sketch for a new project, his pencil scratching across the page. She'd found something, a chat log from a private server, linking Richard to a woman named Dr. Margaret Voss, a rival therapist who'd lost clients to my practice. Margaret, in her late 50s, was a quiet figure in Seattle's psychology scene, her name buried in conference programs and old emails. Elise's voice was urgent as she explained that Margaret had pushed Richard to discredit me, hoping to reclaim her influence. My heart pounded, the fog thick outside the windows, and I felt a mix of dread and clarity. Margaret, with her reserved smile and sharp eyes, had been at the conference, her gaze lingering as I faltered under Richard's rumors. I wondered if she'd written the letter, protecting her role or settling a score. I went to my lawyer the next day, my notebook heavy in my hands, its pages creased from my grip. The lawyer, a calm woman with a tidy desk, took my statement, jotting down Elise's findings in the letter. She said we could file a complaint with the ethics board against Margaret, maybe push for a defamation suit, but warned it'd be tough without hard proof. I left her office, the Seattle air sharp with the smell of rain and cedar, and stopped at a tech store, buying a small recorder, its weight reassuring in my pocket. The idea of confronting Margaret scared me, but it felt like a step toward control, like I was doing something to protect Tom and my practice, even if it was risky. Tom started asking questions, his quiet curiosity sharper now. One night, as we walked along the Seattle waterfront, the air cool with the smell of salt and kelp, he caught me checking my phone, my eyes scanning the crowd. His hand stilled on mine, and he asked if something was wrong with the practice, his voice steady but worried. I couldn't lie, not fully. I told him someone was upset about my work with Richard, and I was being careful, but we were safe. He nodded, squeezing my hand, and said he'd watch out for anything strange. I hugged him, his warmth anchoring me, and felt a pang of pride and guilt. I thought about a fall when we were newlyweds, hiking in the Cascades, his laugh echoing as we tripped over roots. I'd protect him no matter what. Elise came through with a contact, a former colleague of Margaret's who'd left the field. We met at a quiet cafe, the air warm with the smell of pastries and coffee, her notebook worn but neat. She took my notebook, promising to check Margaret's old emails for ties to Richard's scheme, and suggested I avoid conferences alone for now. I thanked her, slipping her cash I'd saved for a new office chair, and drove home, my mind racing. Margaret, or someone tied to her, was out there, and I was in their sights. The fear changed me, made me quieter, more cautious. I'd catch myself watching clients, wondering if they were connected to Margaret. I'd check the locks twice, the camera feed a constant companion. At the office, I kept my head down, focusing on sessions. The steady rhythm of work a distraction, but I couldn't ignore the way some colleagues avoided my eyes. The gossip quieter now, but not gone. Richard's betrayal lingered, even if he was out, and I wondered if I'd ever feel safe in my field again. Then, one evening, Elise called, her voice urgent. She'd found an email from Margaret to Richard, sent weeks before the anonymous letter, hinting at neutralizing Laura's influence if Richard failed. She'd passed it to the ethics board, who were now reviewing Margaret's conduct. My heart raced, the kitchen dark except for the glow of my phone. It should have felt like progress, but it didn't. I kept thinking about my mom, her voice soft as she told me to be brave, her hands warm as she taught me to tie my shoes. I was trying, but bravery felt like a luxury when someone was watching. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't stop. Not for me, but for Tom, for my clients, for the practice I'd built. I thought about that pier photo, Tom's grin as we leaned into the wind, and felt a quiet resolve. I'd faced Richard and won. I could face this, whatever it was. But as I locked the office that night, the camera blinking red, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was just beginning. I told him someone was stirring trouble about my work with Richard, but I was handling it, and we were okay. He frowned, his fingers tightening around mine, and said he'd keep an eye out, his voice calm but firm. I leaned into him, the salt air sharp, and felt a mix of guilt and gratitude. I thought about a spring when we were engaged, sitting on a Seattle ferry, his arm around me as we watched the city shrink, his quiet promise to always have my back. I'd protect him, no matter the cost, but the weight of keeping secrets was starting to wear me down. My routine became a fortress, each step deliberate, like charting a client's progress. I'd arrive at the office early, the Seattle dawn casting a soft glow through the blinds, and check the camera feed, my coffee cooling as I scanned for anything off. I'd sit with clients, their stories a tether to my purpose, but my mind would drift to Margaret, to the letter, wondering who else might be watching. I kept the notebook close, its pages a map of my fight. Email logs, the letter's neat script, a list of Margaret's conference appearances. I'd flip through it at night, the house quiet except for the hum of Tom's woodworking in the garage, and feel the fear settle deeper, like ink bleeding into paper. I thought about a winter when I was 8, my mom teaching me to knit, her hands patient as she told me to keep going, even when the stitches tangled. I was trying, but the tangles felt endless. Elise kept pushing, her calls a steady rhythm in the chaos. One morning, as I watered the office plants, the air fresh with the smell of soil and lavender, she texted me a screenshot, an old email from Margaret to a conference organizer, suggesting they reconsider my presentation slot, dated weeks before Richard's lies surfaced. It was a thread, thin but real, tying her to the sabotage. I saved it in the notebook, my hands steady despite the adrenaline, and felt a shift, like finding a client's breakthrough moment. I was scared, but I was also angry, tired of being a target. I met Elise at a Seattle diner, the air warm with the smell of pancakes and coffee, and she showed me more. A payment from Margaret to a tech consultant who'd helped Richard access the private forum. My heart raced, the coffee mug heavy in my hands. and I knew we were close, closer than we'd been to Richard. I took the notebook to my lawyer again, meeting her in her office, the Seattle skyline a gray smudge through the window. Her name was Karen, her calm voice a contrast to the clutter of legal books around her, and she flipped through my notes, the new email and payment record tucked inside. She said we had enough for a formal ethics complaint against Margaret, maybe even a civil suit, but cautioned that Margaret's connections in Seattle's academic circles could make it messy. I nodded, the notebook heavy in my lap, and felt a flicker of hope, like a client's first smile after months of work. Driving home, the Puget Sound glinting under a rare sun. I thought about a fall when I was 14, my mom driving me to my first therapy session after my dad left, her hands steady on the wheel as she told me to keep fighting. I was fighting, but the stakes felt higher now. Tom's concern grew, his quiet strength tested by my silence. One evening, as we grilled salmon in the backyard, the air warm with the smell of cedar and lemon, he asked why I kept the office door locked, his voice gentle but pointed. I hesitated, the spatula heavy in my hand, and told him about the letter. About Margaret, keeping my tone steady to ease his worry. His eyes darkened, but he nodded, pulling me close, and said we'd face it together. I buried my face in his shoulder, the smoke curling around us, and felt a pang of relief and fear. I thought about a summer when we were newlyweds, planting herbs in our tiny balcony garden, his laugh bright as we spilled soil everywhere. I'd keep that laughter safe no matter what. The ethics board was my next step, my notebook heavier with every meeting, its pages a testament to my resolve. I met Karen at a Seattle coffee shop, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and rain, and she outlined the complaint process, warning that Margaret's influence could sway opinions. Elise found one more piece, a chat log, where Margaret admitted to guiding Richard's posts, hoping to level the field. I sent it to Karen, my hands steady as I typed, and felt a quiet strength, like helping a client face their truth. The board scheduled a hearing, and I prepared, gathering client testimonials, my desk cluttered with notes and Tom's sketches, his quiet support a lifeline. The hearing was a quiet battle, a small room in a Seattle office building, the air stale with the smell of old carpet and tension. I wasn't there. Karen and Elise handled it, but Elise called me after, her voice tired but triumphant. The board had sanctioned Margaret, citing her role in the rumors, and her reputation took a hit, her clients drifting to others. My practice was thriving again, the office warm with the hum of appointments, and I stood by my window, the Seattle skyline glowing, feeling a bittersweet relief, like closing a client's file after years of work. Tom hugged me when I got home, his arms strong, proud of his wife. But I saw Richard's face, Margaret's the letter, and wondered if I'd ever trust my field again. Then came the twist, a month later, as I sorted mail in my office, the air cool with the smell of rain and paper. A new letter, same neat handwriting. You're closer, but not there yet. My hands shook, the office silent except for the tick of the clock, and I felt a surge of dread and curiosity. It wasn't Margaret's writing, or Richard's, but it felt like an echo, a hint that someone else, a colleague, a rival, someone I'd overlooked, had orchestrated it all. I tucked the letter in the notebook, its pages full but no longer heavy, and sat by the window, the Seattle dusk settling over the city. Tom came by that evening, his blueprints tucked under his arm, and leaned against my desk watching me work. He didn't ask about the letter, but he smiled, his eyes warm as he talked about a new project, his voice alive with ideas. I listened, my heart full, and thought about the woman I'd been, the one who trusted mentors, who believed her work was enough. I wasn't her anymore, but I wasn't broken. I was stronger, wary but hopeful, shaped by betrayal but not defined by it. I'd won, not everything, but enough. A life with Tom, a practice I loved, a purpose that held me up. But as the Seattle stars emerged, the letter's words lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, waiting for me to let my guard down. The second letter, "You're closer, but not there yet," felt like a whisper from the dark, its neat handwriting a taunt I couldn't ignore. I sat by my office window, the Seattle dusk wrapping the city in a soft gray, my hands gripping the paper, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and resolve. I'm Laura Bennett, 42, a therapist with curly brown hair, green eyes that see through people, and a calm exterior that hides my fierce loyalty. I'd fought off Dr. Richard Hale, my mentor, who'd sabotaged my career with lies, and Dr. Margaret Voss, the rival who'd fueled his betrayal. But that letter told me someone else was out there, the real orchestrator, and the thought of them threatening Tom or my practice made my chest tighten. I tucked the letter into my notebook, its pages worn but heavy with truth, next to a photo of Tom and me at a Seattle pier, our smiles a reminder of what I was fighting for. I locked the office, the click sharp in the quiet, and drove home, the Puget Sound a dark mirror, my mind racing with shadows I couldn't name. My days were a careful dance, the hum of client sessions a tether, but every creak of the office floor felt like a warning. I'd sit with patience, guiding them through their fears, the smell of lavender from my diffuser steadying me, but my own fears lingered, making me flinch at sudden calls. I'd check the camera feed obsessively, its red light blinking like a wary eye, and scan the lot for anything off. A strange car, a shadow too long. I told Tom about the second letter finally, one night as we sat in the living room, the Seattle rain tapping the windows, the air warm with the smell of chamomile tea. His architect's eyes darkened, his hand tightening on mine, and he asked me to be careful, his voice steady but heavy with worry. I nodded, hating how my fight was pulling him in, and thought of a winter when we were dating, sharing hot cocoa on a Seattle bench, his scarf catching the snow as he teased me about my mittens. I'd promised him a good life, and now I was clawing to keep that promise. Tom's concern grew sharper, his quiet strength a lifeline I leaned into. One evening, as we sorted laundry, the house warm with the smell of detergent and cedar, he asked if I'd seen anyone odd near the office, his voice low, his hands pausing on a folded shirt. I told him about a man I'd noticed twice, lingering across the street, his face hidden by a cap, gone before I could focus. Tom frowned, promising to check the house locks, and I hugged him, his warmth anchoring me. I thought about a summer when we were newlyweds, biking along the Seattle waterfront, his laugh bright as we raced to the pier. I'd protect that joy no matter what. Elise was relentless, her investigator's mind a beacon in the fog. We met at a Seattle park, the air crisp with the smell of pine and wet grass, and I showed her the new letter, my voice low. She studied it, her fingers tracing the script, and said it felt like someone higher up, maybe a funding partner or a conference organizer who'd backed Richard and Margaret. She offered to dig into the conference's financials, looking for names tied to both, but warned me to stay low, her eyes serious. I nodded, grateful, but felt a chill, the kind that settles deep. Driving home, the city lights blurred by rain. I kept thinking about a fall when I was 10, my mom teaching me to bake, her hands steady as she told me to face my fears. I was trying, but fear was a shadow I couldn't shake. I built more defenses, small but deliberate, like tightening a client's safety plan. I added a motion sensor to the office door, its soft beep a reassurance, and backed up my files to a secure drive. I asked Tom to text me when he left work. his quick replies a comfort. Elise kept me grounded, dropping by with coffee, her quiet presence a reminder I wasn't alone. She'd sit with me in the office, the Seattle skyline fading into dusk, and I'd hear my mom's voice, her hands warm as she told me to hold tight to what mattered. The notebook stayed in my drawer, its pages now a chronicle. Letters, emails, the man in the cap, next to that pier photo, its edges soft from my touch. Elise's breakthrough came on a foggy morning as I helped Tom with breakfast, the kitchen warm with the smell of pancakes and coffee. She called, her voice urgent, and said she'd found a name, Dr. Alan Crane, a conference chair who'd funneled money to Margaret and Richard, hoping to control Seattle's therapy scene. Alan, in his 60s, was a low-profile figure, his name buried in funding reports. But his influence was wide, a puppet master behind the conference that nearly ruined me. My heart pounded, the spatula heavy in my hand, and I felt a mix of dread and clarity. Alan, with his polished suits and quiet voice, had been at the conference, his nod polite as I faltered. He could be the one behind the letters, guarding his empire. I took the notebook to Karen, my lawyer, meeting her at a Seattle cafe, the air thick with the smell of espresso and rain. Her calm eyes scanned Elise's findings. A bank transfer from Alan to Margaret, dated before Richard's lies. Karen said we could push for an ethics investigation, maybe alert the conference board, but warned that Alan's clout could stall it. I left, the Seattle air sharp with the smell of cedar, and bought a small safe for the notebook, its weight a promise of safety. Installing it, my hands steady despite the fog, felt like reclaiming a piece of my life, even if it was small. Tom's questions grew bolder, his love fierce but strained. One night, as we walked the dog, the Seattle streets quiet with the smell of damp pavement and pine, he asked if the letters were tied to someone bigger, his voice steady but worried. I told him about Alan, keeping my tone calm, and he stopped, his hand on mine, saying we'd face it together. I hugged him, the dog's leash tangling, and thought about a spring when we adopted our pup. Tom's grin wide as we chased her through the yard. I'd keep that home safe, no matter the cost. The resolution came quietly, like a client's final session. Elise called on a crisp afternoon as I sorted client notes, the office warm with the smell of lavender and paper. The conference board had investigated Alan after Elise leaked his financial ties, and he'd stepped down, his influence crumbling as sponsors pulled back. The letters stopped, the man in the cap vanished, and my practice was safe, the hum of appointments steady again. I stood in the office, the Seattle skyline glowing, feeling a hollow triumph, like helping a client heal only to carry their pain. I threw myself back into work, the rhythm of sessions a quiet joy, the air thick with the smell of coffee and trust. Tom was thriving, his latest design winning a local award, his laughter bright as we planned a weekend hike. Elise stopped by, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, and we shared a coffee, her nod a reminder of our fight. I'd beaten Richard, Margaret, and Alan, kept my practice, but the trust I'd had in Seattle's academic world was fractured, replaced by a caution I couldn't shake. The office felt different now, the walls quieter, the camaraderie I'd loved tainted by what I'd seen. I focused on clients, the steady flow of their stories a tether to the therapist I'd been. But late at night, I'd think about Richard, Margaret, Alan, the cost of standing tall. I didn't hate them. Hate was too heavy. I pitied them, their ambition a hollow chase that left them empty. I'd look at the pier photo, Tom's smile gleaming, and feel a quiet resolve. I'd kept my family safe, but I'd lost a piece of myself, the part that believed in unshakable trust. Then, 3 months after Alan's fall, I found a note in my office mailbox, tucked among client forms. It was a single line, in that same neat script. "You won this round, Laura." My hands shook, the office silent except for the hum of the air conditioner, and I felt a surge of fear and defiance. It wasn't Alan's writing, or Margaret's, or Richard's, but it felt like a signal, a hint that someone else, a silent ally, a new rival, had been watching, maybe even helping. I tucked the note in the notebook, its pages full but no longer heavy, and sat by the window, the Seattle dawn breaking over the city. Tom came by that morning, his sketchbook under his arm, and leaned against my desk watching me file papers. He didn't ask about the note, but he smiled, his eyes warm as he talked about our hike, his voice alive with plans. I listened, my heart full, and thought about the woman I'd been, the one who trusted too easily, who thought her practice was a fortress. I wasn't her anymore, but I wasn't broken. I was tougher, cautious but hopeful, shaped by betrayal but not ruled by it. I'd won, not everything, but enough. A life with Tom, a practice I loved, a family that held me together. But as the Seattle sun rose, the note's words lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, waiting for my next move.